Well, first of all, welcome everybody. My name's Kenny Reed. Welcome from the exceptionally cold Northeast United States. I'm here in Newport, Rhode Island. We are freezing and snowy, and wish I was down there in Sydney with everybody else that we're going to be talking to today. Um, the, the 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 real impetus behind this webinar is twofold. First thing is we want to hear about the Sydney Hobart race. For those of us who are in cold areas around the world, it's a yearly source of entertainment. For the people who are doing it, it's certainly always a source of entertainment. For those of us sitting on the couch, we sit back and second guess everybody's decisions as they smash their way up the coast, down the coast towards Tasmania. So the second thing that we're going to want to try to talk about here is the fact that a lot of people, we're trying to grow participation in the sport of sailing. We've been working on this thing called Regatta Refresh, which is kind of trying to bring back fun, a little more fun into the sport of sailing. And also part of what we're trying to do is increase participation by maybe taking the intimidation out of doing things like signing up and actually participating in these short offshore races. I'm sorry, I say short offshore races. I guess you end up saying that when you sailed around the world a few times. These 600 milers feel short these days. For a lot of people, this is the longest thing they're ever going to do in their lives. And I think part of what we're going to try to do tonight is we're going to talk to a group of experts, and we're going to try to demystify what signing up for and preparing. And we're not going to get into the obviously the nitty-gritty details, but the general basic big points of signing up for a race like this. Not everybody signs up to do a race like this to win. In fact, most people sign up to participate and not to win. So it's an interesting scenario, and I'm struggling, Laura, with my screen. Here we go. Sorry. So we rename this compete or complete. And then the reason for this is I was told once by a coach a long, long time ago that about 10% of people who show up to regattas are actually showing up thinking that they have a chance to be in the top few places in the regatta. And that might even be a high number if you really think about it. Most people show up to be part of the adventure. And the Sydney Hobart race, as well as many of these offshore 600 milers, are absolute examples of that. Today, we're going to talk to a few special guests, everybody from the Sydney area, everybody participating in some form or fashion in this past Sydney Hobart race. Ian Murray, Andrew Parks, Mark Bradford, and Damian King. And we'll get into, I think, most of the people I've just mentioned do not need much of an introduction. Um, First of all, for those who are watching this who don't know some of the facts and figures of the Sydney Hobart race, this past race was the 80th edition. It's always Boxing Day, starts the day after Christmas in Sydney. It's a really interesting, diverse fleet. Having done it a couple times myself, it's fascinating to see the extremes of the boat types that enter this fleet. This time it was a pretty good year, I believe. 128 yachts is a pretty good number for the Sydney Hobart race. It happens every single year, and certainly races that happen every single year tend to have slightly less boats than the biannual races that go off. Only 93 finished, and I think that's also probably standard because you know what? It's rough. This is a nasty place to go sailing. It's a huge achievement just to complete the race, and we'll talk to some of these guys about how many times they've done it and why they keep going back. This race was won on handicap for the first time by a female skipper. It's been won by a female owner before, but it's never been won by a female skipper. And it's the first time this race on handicap has been won by a double-handed boat. So a couple really interesting new parts of offshore racing are coming to fruition. And you know the reason we're escalating the Sydney Hobart in front of the world right now in something like this, in a webinar like this, and recording it, and we'll have this out certainly through all the social media channels for North Sails, is it's really to try to show people who are considering entering the Bermuda race, the Middle Sea race, the Fastnet race, Transpac, Caribbean 600. These are kind of the big six of these 600-mile short to medium distance offshore races. But like I said, for some people, these will be the longest races they've ever done in their lives, and it's reasonably intimidating to try to even enter a race like this. So we're going to try to take some of that intimidation away and talk about not only some of the heroes of the race, but also some of the ways to participate, to ease the participation, the kind of the entry anxiety that goes into a race like this. So it's a pretty simple race, really. It's amazing how complex a simple race like this is. But again, it's also interesting how all these races, kind of like I said before, those big six of the races around the world, all come out to be a little over 600 miles, 628 miles, straight shot. The beauty of this race is you can almost guarantee at least one frontal passage that's going to mess things up. Never mind, a lot of times for the smaller boats, two and even three frontal passages as you go down the coast. Um, I've done this race twice, and this is not going to be about me, I promise. The, both times I had a different start. Coming out of Sydney Harbor, I have to say, as a sailor who sailed in quite a bit of kind of high profile races in my life, coming out of Sydney Harbor is one of the very coolest things I've ever done in a sailboat race. The crowd, the anticipation, the narrowness of the channel, the fact that there's a bloody there's a sandbar down the middle of it. It divides the fleet into two halves very often. Sometimes, like this race this year, it's downwind out of the harbor. Other times, when it's blowing out of the north, it's a beat out of the harbor, and you get to turn the corner and put up the big sails for quite a while you're going down the coast. This is the way that I remember just dreading, because essentially you have about 10 minutes of sheer bliss, spinnaker up, lovely sailing, flat water, everything's good. And then you have this. And then this is the realization that, oh my God, what have I signed up for? We have another couple days. It could be hours, it could be days of bashing upwind towards Tasmania in a southerly, what I think most of these guys reference a southerly buster. And this year was one of those years where the southerly was in and they had to turn the corner, park yourself on the rail, realize you're going to have a pretty sore ass in a pretty short period of time, and off we go. Well, let's talk to the people who actually did the race this year and some of the heroes of the race. There's no question that Comanche is near and dear to my heart. I call it my second child. Ian Murray, as the sailing master, had the opportunity to sail with Master Lock Comanche this year. And we'd like to first of all, welcome Ian. He obviously will go backwards for a second. For those of you who may not know, and I don't think anybody in Australia doesn't know who Ian is, and a designer, builder, sailor, race manager, 18-foot skiffs, Etchells, stars. I think you just went into the America's Cup Hall of Fame, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's yeah. So
Congratulations. So anyway, um, Ian, first of all, thank you for coming. Welcome. We appreciate your time. And give us a little, give us a little kind of background as to I know you were sailing with the Wild Oats team forever, which turned into Palm Beach this time. How did you end up with Comanche, and how did this kind of group come together? It's passed through several different ownership groups or charter groups since the Clarks originally built it about 10 years ago. How did this all come about?
um, yeah, as you said, I was 15 years on Wild Oats with Rico, and then sort of COVID came, and we sat out a race 1 year, and then it didn't participate. And unknowing what was happening, just after COVID, the Winning family from down here, very well known sailing family, were looking for something to do, and the opportunity came up to get hold of Comanche, which was sitting in Antigua, and the only way of getting it back here in time was to actually sail it back. So I've long been associated with the Winnings, and particularly John Winning Jr. or Herman and his 18-foot skiffs and stuff. And so, I just became part of the team to put the team together. And that ran for 2 years. And then it swapped over to Matt Allen and James Mayo, who took up the lease of the boat. And it's run for the last 2 years, and this was the second year of their involvement with it. So, for all of those 4 campaigns, I've been the sort of sailing manager of the boat to sort of deal with, the immeasurable logistics of running one of these boats.
So you turn the corner, you start the race, you go ripping out the harbor, turn the corner, and this is what you do for the next, day and a half?
Yeah, close to 2 days, really. One and a half, 2 days. So it was 2 full nights at sea, going hard upwind in sort of 30 plus knots of wind, to 5 meters, 6 meter seas, I guess.
We wonder why there's not more participation. It's I think one of the most remarkable parts of Comanche is that it actually goes upwind pretty well, doesn't it?
Look, she's a remarkable boat, and take my hat off to you and the team who put it together. She's robust, she's fast, and as you say, she's your second child. I think everyone who's sailed on her carries those same feelings forwards, that it's such an incredibly big and powerful boat, yet in a funny sort of way friendly to its crew. It looks after them as well as you looking after her.
No question about it. So as you're going through the night, there's several. You have essentially five major rivals for first to finish, and first to finish is everything. These boats, you don't care about handicap.
No, we're not. We have no focus at all on the handicap. The one thing Comanche doesn't do very well is rate.
That's for sure. Matter of fact, that was number one item on the design brief. As a matter of fact, I can attest to that. Um, so you're battling it out all night long with Law Connect. Lucky's just behind. Palm Beach is just behind. Scalawag is just behind. And you guys are battling it out, and I think you work yourself out to a pretty nice little lead here. And if I look at the lower left-hand corner, I think that Breeze is kind of you might be reaching at this stage. This is with 160 miles to go. That's the side of that's Tasmania, I assume. And
Yeah.
ripping a long 10-mile lead. Life looks good, right, at this stage?
Um, yeah, look, there was always going to be this transition in when the southerly and the low moved to the east, and then the northerly and northwesterly winds sort of came across, from the land. So we always knew, that first part of the race, the two big, you know, high riding moment boats, Law Connect and Comanche, were going to duke it out. And we had a pretty sort of epic battle upwind, sailing, fast. And as Tony Mutter said to me, no one's ever really pushed these boats upwind in those sort of conditions like we have for the last day and a half, sort of charging along at 14 knots out of waves and everything. But that all came to an end. And I guess for us, our strategy was that we wanted to place the boat in the best possible opportunity to get the new breeze first, and we
Going
believe that was.
going full well, it's coming. So weather-wise, everybody knows. The whole world knows there's a transition coming.
Yeah, that's right. And so, seeing we were first to the party, we thought we'd take the seat closest to the shore.
And
Um,
how did that decision go? Because I've seen it go both ways. How did that decision go? Because it's a pretty risky move. All of a sudden, essentially, you've given up the lead. You've given up any sort of between your man and the hoop, so to speak, and you had some conviction here.
yeah, look, we believed in, our routing and forecasting and strategy had been pretty spot on for the whole summer. So I think we were very confident in our decision making. Sure, it probably looked aggressive off the boat to be out in one side, not trying to cover all the options, but we were very firmly believed and we could see the breeze, tracking the way up the coast the way it was meant to. So we positioned ourselves. Obviously, when 8 mile lead to Law Connect, probably 12 or 14 mile to Scallywag evaporate as we sailed into it first, but it was always going to be like that. And then Scallywag sort of, in terms of they got a bit further south than us, so it probably looked better on there, but we were still always confident that we were going to get the northerly wind off the shore first. So there was probably a little anxiety, but
and the speed's starting to come up again. You're still comfortable. Like, bring us on board for 1 minute. Like, any how how laser visioned were some of the eyeballs, especially the charters and things like that? I mean, it's one thing to say we're anticipating this. It's another thing when it happens and everything you've worked for 2 days just goes to hell in minutes.
it's certainly, there is some anxiety. Have you made the right decision? Boats are moving outside you to the east, and they're still in the old breeze, and we're stuck in waiting for the new breeze. So it's difficult, but we were committed to it. We didn't have any way out, and so we had to stick to our guns and sail the boat through the light air transition the best possible way we can. And as the big old girl with her large amount of stern submersion doesn't like too little breeze.
That's for sure. That could be the understatement of the century, actually.
Yeah. So look, there wasn't any second guessing. There wasn't any finger pointing. Well, we've made the wrong decision. What are we doing in here? There was none of that. It was just all focus on getting the boat going as best as we could, minimize our losses. Which, as it turned out, we never really got more than about 300, maybe half a mile behind. So, for us, that was a win.
And then once it kind of all filled again, essentially the three of you are right next to each other. It becomes a drag race again, and you kind of let the boat do its thing.
Yeah, it was a building breeze. And so we were sandwiched between Law Connect and Scallywag. So if we were on port tack, um, we were covered by Scallywag. And if we're on starboard tack, were covered by Law Connect. So we had to wriggle our way, through a series of drives down the coast in a building breeze. And, Comanche doesn't really do her thing at 8 knots. And once again, it's a matter of hanging on and being patient and let the breeze rise. And we were expecting it to get to 20 knots. So as soon as we probably got to 13 or 14 knots, we're starting to gain. And we did a good job, I think, of staying in the middle of them and keeping our air clear and getting back to the shore, which we had to keep on doing in the building breeze.
It was actually pretty remarkable. In about a 60 mile range, you got out to a 4 mile lead again. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing was when we went around Tasman Island, in wind direction of probably 025, over in Storm Bay, the wind was at 125. It was 100 degrees right. And so the strategy to get through that next transition into that is where we did a really good job by really pressing the right side of the course and working the favourable wind, sailing hot angles to go fast into the ships. And, by the time we got down to the finish, we'd extended that out to probably 12 miles.
Always fun to see the old girl doing something like this, ripping in at pace. But what did it feel like, especially after the disappointment of 2024? Was there any different feeling, or is this for you? How many of these races have you done, by the way?
This was my 31st race. Um,
Every time one of you guys says something like that, you just have to question your sanity. You realize it doesn't sound normal, right?
Yeah, certifiable, really.
Um, did this overall win? You've won this race overall a bunch of times. Did this feel any different? Feel the same?
Well, this is the 11th time I've taken line honours in this race, and I've won it 3 times on overall handicap as well. But this was a very special race because it was a hard race and a tough race, and we had a great crew that was very sort of, very good at doing their job, supporting their teammates and going forward. And so by the time you get to the finish, and it was a bit of a fairy tale finish to finish at 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, which in good breeze coming down the Derwent River. And as you can see, it looked like pretty much everyone in Hobart came out to greet us. And so that was very special in that it was nice to be met by all those people. But it was a race where, I felt like, we earned and deserved our win.
Awesome. Very well done. Like you said, the crew is as important, and we'll get into crew here in a few more minutes. Let's move away from the fine yacht Comanche for a minute, and let's go to the overall winner, the handicap winner, the Tattersall Cup winner, Min River, and we Zhang Lin, Chinese woman, first woman skipper to ever win this race, first double-handed skipper to ever win this race, along with her co-skipper, Alexis Loison. Um, Alexis, amazingly enough, and I just found this out, I should have known this before, but in the year 2005, he won on handicap the Fastnet race and the Sydney Hobart race. And I wonder if there's anybody who's ever skippered a boat who's won both of those races on handicap. And so I'll leave that to all of you out there in the world who are better at Google than I am to figure that one out. That is unbelievably impressive. Both of them are not with us tonight, but we have Andrew Parks, who's one of our hot shots at North Sails in Sydney. He's worked with this group for a long time, sorting out their boat and getting themselves organized. And not only is this an amazing story. First of all, the double-handed side of things is just an amazing story. But it also, I think this is a really nice example of, let's call it a minimum inventory, because I did a lot of double-handed sailing around here during the COVID time, and you're really trying to do everything with as few sails as possible. That's one of the very keys to double-handed sailing. But that also equates to just sailors in general. Most of the people, we don't want to spend any extra money. We don't want sails that we don't need on board the boat. We want to try to get by with as few um, great sails as humanly possible, and that's what a double-handed boat has to do by definition. So we have Andrew here with us today to talk about this team and these people, and especially the owner. She must be special. This is a JPK 1080, which obviously is a really well-refined IRC boat out of France. And Andrew, take us through how did you meet these folks, and tell us a little bit about the owner.
Thanks, Kenny. Yeah, it's an interesting story. I first met Zhang at the Sydney Boat Show almost 10 years ago when I was selling X-Yachts in Australia. And she came on board and said, I want to buy my first sailing yacht and I'm interested in buying an X-Yacht from you. And most people would have said, yeah, of course. But anyway, we took the time to chat and she ended up buying an X-Yacht from me and said she was going to go sailing at Balmain Sailing Club on, Sunday afternoon. So it was really a club racing boat, and that was it. And anyway, before long, she sort of said, I want to go IRC racing. And the inventory that we initially put on the boat really didn't lend itself to IRC. They're more non-rating PHS SARs. So we developed an inventory of SARs for the X4.3 that were a bit more IRC friendly. And like many people, she was struggling to find good crew and keen crew. So she decided she'd like to try two-handed sailing. And so she got the boat into full Cat 1 safety for two-handed racing and was all lined up to do the Sydney Hobart race in 2002. 2022. And she had an injury just before the race and had to withdraw, which was very disappointing. And as everyone on this call knows, to prepare a boat for the Sydney Hobart race is quite an onerous task and quite expensive to do. Anyway, once that was over, she worked out that a 41-foot X-Yacht was really just too big and heavy for her to sail two-handed. And so she decided that she'd get on the hunt for a more appropriate boat, and that's where she found the JPK 1030. And so she purchased a JPK 1030 from JPK Composites in France, and took delivery of the boat in 2023, and spent 4 months sailing the boat in France with the guys from JPK and learning it.
So obviously there's a misconception, I would imagine, that if you're double handing, you got to be big and strong. I've never met her before, but she looks like a petite woman. I mean, these two must be really talented at what they do, because this is, first of all, as Ian said, not the greatest conditions in the world. It must have been like brutal on a little boat like that with just two people on board.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Zhang is a reasonably petite woman, but she's very determined. She's got quite good fitness, and she works hard at sailing. But with the tough conditions that they had on the first 2 days, Zhang said to me, we had a chat after the race, that Alexis just said to her, "We've just got to survive the first 2 days, and then we'll be in good shape for the rest of the race." So they hunkered down, kept the boat safe, kept it in good shape, got through that, and then once the conditions changed, they were in a position where they could start aggressively, attacking the race.
These races so often are determined. The handicap is determined by a good and sometimes fortunate weather window. Obviously, the double-handed boats kind of fit into that slot, didn't they, in this race? Because I think when we were talking about this webinar, Ian said something like they went upwind for 60% of the race, where these boats might have gone downwind for 60% of the race, and it's kind of luck of the draw, isn't it?
Oh, look, it is. And, all of us who've, done the Hobart race know that, most of the time, if it's a nor'easter, the big boats just stay in that one system the whole way and they leg out, and the little boats will be hit with one or two, southerly fronts down the track. This year it was the reverse. They started in a southerly and finished in northerly breezes. And it was a case of the little boats, blowing home. But history shows in the last, 10, 15 years, it's pretty well always been a 50-foot plus boat that's won the race overall.
So he's obviously a star, right? And he's done really well in the Figaro and other shorthanded racing. So when are we going to see him in a Mocha or something like that? I would imagine pretty soon, because this is an incredibly rare feat and really impressive.
Yeah, look, I mean, like, I guess like all Frenchmen, his goal and dream would to be in an Amoca. But he had a very good season in his class 40 last year, and his sponsors have committed to build a new boat with him for this year. So he'll be doing his thing in that, later in this year. So, but he's certainly a guy who's, he's done very well, and he's on the climb.
So as we talked about a couple minutes ago, I think this is a really nice example, and it's actually one of the questions that came in pre-webinar here. What's a basic inventory that you can do a race like this? And this is actually a really interesting inventory. First of all, there's S sales and A sales, so that's probably a slight complexion that the average person doesn't need to go through. But this is a pretty reasonable inventory to try to get you through a 600-mile race.
Yeah, it is. And it was very interesting, because when the boat was launched in France, the guys at X-Yachts France provided the original inventory, obviously because they could commission the sails and service them and everything else. So when the boat came to Sydney, I sat down with Zhang and we talked about sailing in Australia, because it's quite different. And in a lot of places in Europe and North America, when the wind's light, there's flat water. Whereas in Sydney, as you know, Kenny, we can have a 6-knot day offshore, but it'll be bumpy and leftover seaway and things like that. Also, they tend to sail with more breeze in the UK and on the Atlantic coast. So the trend with these boats has been to make the sail small, keep the rating low, and just get through that. So we decided to build a new J1 for the boat, and we made it bigger. It fully filled up the fore triangle. Just suited the rig geometry perfectly. Just kissed the D1 when it was fully sheeted on, and that gave the boat a bit more grunt in the light air. And then the J2 was what was previously called a J15 on the boat. Then we had the J4, which could then reef down, and then the sail below that was the storm jib. And then again, trying to improve the boat's performance. Billy Sykes at the Loft in Sydney has done a lot of work with these two-handed boats, and we did a lot of work, as a group for the Admirals Cup on Code Zeros. So we decided to build a Helix Code 75 for the boat that would it flew from the masthead and was out on the end of the sprit, and we could sheet it on the jib tracks, so you could almost go fully upwind with it. But then as soon as you ease the sheets, you end up with a sail that was almost double the area of the jib. So it was a really powerful sail in the inventory. Storm jib, now you just got to have one, and the S2 was a good all-purpose sail. It was made of two different weights of cloth, so it was a little bit stronger on the luff and leech, and that proved to be a really good sail for them. And then they had an A3 and an A5 from some French lofts. The French seem to love, their own spinnakers. What was interesting though that we don't see here is both of those sails had a reef in them, and that's a really popular thing for short-handed sailing, that you can just zip the reef up and end up with, you effectively get 4 sails out of 2. It doesn't do the sail much good when you sail with the reef because all the panel orientation is wrong, but it gets you out of a predicament. So yeah, that was the inventory. The one thing that I would note though, and I didn't even know this until I met with Zhang, the mainsail, all of the upwind sails, all the jibs and the mainsail are all 3DI raw, and that mainsail has done 3 Sydney Hobart races and 3 Sydney Hobart deliveries back. So it's done on over 4,000 miles of sailing, which is pretty remarkable, with one mainsail.
Very good advertisement. Your commission check will be paid this week. Congratulations. Nice job.
I'll look forward to receiving it, Kenny.
Yeah, that's good. Great job. And we know either of them couldn't be with us here tonight, but please pass on our congratulations and regards, because that is one hell of a feat. Really, really well done.
Yeah, I surely will. No, it was a great achievement. Very, very proud to be involved.
All right, let's move along. We got another sailing star in Australia that probably doesn't need to be introduced. A past winner overall in the Sydney Hobart race. I believe he's done 20 Sydney Hobart races. I think I originally met Squawk, who we all call him, maybe sailing Etchells a long time ago. But anyway, he runs our North Sails community in the Southern Hemisphere. And so, Mark Bradford, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All right, so we're just going to get into, Ian mentioned how many times he's done this race. I don't think you've done it quite as many times, but what's the lure? What keeps bringing people back? When you see rounding, coming out of the harbor, rounding the mark and turning and going upwind. I remember doing it. I remember turning and going upwind going, crap, this is going to suck. Well, like what keeps bringing people back to this race?
Look, I can't answer for everyone, and it sort of doesn't make any sense why I come back. It's a well-known thing that I get a little bit on the seasick side from time to time. So I know when I was young, people would talk about 20, 30 races, and I never had any intention of doing any. And I think this coming year will be my 20th race. So I don't really know how that happens. You go through a state of, in the preparation, getting your mind ready for something that's going to be out of the ordinary. And then during the race, I'm pretty sure everyone at some point asks the question of, what am I doing here? That's sort of one of the thrills. And then for some reason, as soon as you have your first beer in Customs House, you've forgotten about all that and you're already planning your next expedition. So To answer your question, I really have no idea. I think it's reflecting on what you're getting towards Ian early with his 32nd or 33rd race. I guess there's a little bit of lunatic fringe in this.
Yeah, no question. Well, I said yes to going around the world the second time, so I'm kind of with you. I get it. Um, the range of boats over a 20-year period, the range of boats you've done this race in, is pretty extreme, right? I think the smallest a 40-footer, and then the biggest a 100-footer.
Yeah, look, that's a good point. I mean, I look back now and sort of, and we're just talking about Zhang, winning in a JPK 1080, and I did my first race in a class far 40, and that's like the standard staggy boat with the big steering wheel and spun out head to wind, more times than I can count with a spinnaker on. It's a true windward leeward inshore boat, and for some reason, three of us in the year of '99 decided that we'd take our far 40s down there. I was a part of a crew for a Melbourne group, and then getting one of those boats there was an achievement. And then, in the mid part of my career, same with Jeff Ross on Yendies and 55 footers, and always been on race boats. And then I was lucky enough to sail on Loyal in 2011 that we won line honours on a 100-footer. And I think we had, out of the 20 crew, I think we had something like 7 or 8 celebrities or sports people on board. So we sailed a 100-footer with 12, 13 people. They're all rugby players and handy at moving the sails, so that was great. And then ultimately I ran Peter Harbert's project for 15 years and did the Hobart every year as part of that.
So compete or complete? I mean, I know you've always considered yourself in the 20 that you've done, you're always competing. The goal is to win, but there's a ton of people. And again, we're trying to spread out the vantage point here. A ton of people that might be listening to this saying, I just want to complete this thing. How do I do this? Like because it's an annual thing, when do people start down there preparing and planning? And how do we take that fear factor out of trying to just get yourself organized to get in a race like this?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I know the first bunch that I did, it was a real sort of in your head trying to prepare for the race, trying to picture what you're going to go through. We've seen the videos of people getting lifted off helicopters, and we've seen the sea state. And I think as you do more and more and you get more experience with it, it isn't actually that bad. Like, it's 630 miles. Yeah, there's going to be some tough times in it. This race in particular is a wind against tide thing. Look, there's a lot of luck to and what sort of forecast you're going to get, and you sort of can't prepare whether you do it or not based on that. I think, I did the fast net this year, and it was like a 12-knot windward leeward. I don't think we got splashed at all, and we've seen some horrific fast nets. But one thing I can say is that, the effort that goes into it, and we've been planning already. I've got probably 8 or 9 clients. We've been working on their inventories for next year and planning with their crew and boat modifications. So we're planning for the next Hobart already with our top clients. And, Damien King's going to talk in a little bit about preparing his boat. Like everything, the longer you can prepare, the better. But, 6 months is probably a good place to start for this race in particular.
And safety at sea and all that kind of stuff. There's all that stuff happening in your area all the time. So people have plenty of opportunity to check all those boxes of things that you have to do in order to actually enter the race.
Yeah, and look, the common complaint is the cost around that. But I know myself, for something like a safety at sea course, the refresher on the protocols and how you got to deal with it, and then I skip it a boat for a lot of years. So then I have to distribute that to my group and how we're going to run the boat and what the philosophy is on board. You're always learning about the sport and how to improve the boat, but more importantly, yourself and your mind for these sort of challenges, I guess. So I think, while it is a little bit daunting, there's a lot to come out the back end of it.
So finally, you're helping people, you're doing it yourself, and you get your own program like Blackjack, and you go win this race. What did that feel like as kind of Hey, you got to look in the mirror and say, finally pulled that one off. What was that like?
Oh, look, I mean, I think as Ian described it earlier, you put a team together, you think about every part, and I work with Ian really hard on the Comanche project on the sales side of it. You're thinking about every part, every component, and then there's another step when you're the skipper. You're thinking about crew positions, watches, and then the food, the safety at sea, and all those bits. So there's a lot of effort that goes into it. So it's probably a sense of relief more than anything that you tick it off. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't get the opportunity to do that, and I've been lucky to do it twice as a sailor and once as a skipper. But I think the feeling's kind of the same every time you get there, that you've sort of done it and ticked it off. It's an amazing, amazing race.
And you mentioned earlier, and sorry to bring this up again, but I think seasickness is a big part of our. It's kind of that unspoken part. And first of all, you look like hell, man, in this. Um, but
I was in good shape there, by the way.
what's that?
That was after it all. I was in the best nick I've been in for a couple of days there.
Well, I mean, are there methods to get through this? Because again, I think a lot, especially a lot of amateurs who have not spent a ton of miles at sea, are just like, oh my God, I'm going to get seasick. Like, I knock on wood, I'm one of the lucky few. I don't have the problem. Some of it's in people's heads. Some of it is obviously in their bodies. How do you get through this? How do you tough through this?
Oh, look, I'm pretty fortunate in that I haven't been sick for a few years, and I do a lot of sailing. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. Um, the downside, though, is that like in this last race, I was sort of probably down for 5 or 6 hours. I'm the only one on the boat that speaks for myself, so the other guys might have a different view on that. But I'm lucky enough to be able to come back after I get through the dark space, and some of the guys on board just go down and they're out of play. The really difficult thing is when your job is to drive the boat, and particularly at night, because you drive off numbers. I find that all the sickness assistance, whatever that may be, and I've tried all of them, sort of blur my vision a little bit, so you can't really do your job properly. So I end up not taking anything and just trying to grunt my way through it. Where I know some people, find Sturgeon or some other quells or whatever works for them. It just doesn't seem to work for me, in particular with what my job is. I think if you're a trimmer, you could probably handle having it a bit blurry, but as a driver and on a big boat, you've got a lot of responsibility in the dark at night time to keep everything safe. So you sort of got to roll the numbers in your head, and you've got to keep your vision in check. So I just do it the hard way. But there's a lot of our colleagues at our level, Chris Nicholson, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me talking about this, sort of is in a similar place to me where he can and can't get it. And he's done multiple round the world races, and it doesn't stop you. And, it's just one of those things for us.
I appreciate you bringing that up because, again, I think we're here to tell people who haven't done these races, try to get them through their fears, predisposed fears, quite possibly. So thanks for talking about that. All right,
Anytime.
let's move on. Damian King, and when I said compete or complete, Damian, I'm not trying to put you in the bucket of you're out there just to complete, because I know you take it far more serious than that. In fact, I think you told me that when you were looking at your race tracker, you had yourself in the lead for a fair part of this past race. So believe me, I am not trying to put you in the just compete, complete bucket, but you are a full Corinthian program. And I think that's really important for people. First of all, you don't have to have a pro crew to go do something like this. You do it with all your buddies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, we're lucky to have a team of 10 people who are similar to myself, lifetime sailors. We all got to meet each other at the yacht club we sail out of down here at Sandringham as young teenagers, and we've just sailed together since. I'm 52, and see the guys weekly, and it's great. We get along well, and we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and it's a great team. Yeah.
So the hurdles, the pros, the cons, the benefits. I mean, some people do it out of principle. Like I have a bunch of clients that I'm a Corinthian sailor, damn it, and they pound their fist on the desk and say, I'm never going to hire those damn pros on my boat. Others are just like, "No, I like doing it with my buddies." Where do you fall in that whole conversation?
Well, look, we're lucky enough to have won the actual Worlds twice as Corinthians, and I guess that's sort of fed onto this ambition here. Last two races, we've had one or two pros with us, but Simon Cunnington, who's been my co-owner of the actual for 10, 15 years, suggested we should go all Corinthian, and from there, we all signed up and went through the process of trying to make sure that we could be satisfying Corinthian, and it's just another trophy we could have had a go for, and it had a good feeling. At the end of the day, we're all full-time employed doing things. It's great to be able to step into a boat like this and feel like you can take on the pros, and we did, which was fun. Yeah.
How do you make the preparation not overwhelming? Because it's one thing to be able to call your boat captain or call, a couple of pros and say, "Hey, I need you to do this, this, and this," and before you know it, hopefully it's all said and done. But you guys don't have that luxury.
No, luckily I'm in the property development game, and luckily I'm in a little bit of a gap of doing projects. So it's fair to say my full-time job leading up to the race for, let's say, a month or two was working on the boat every day. So there's also a great group of people down here at Sandy Yacht Club that I can call on who are just fantastic, just amazing to have every single trade on tap that are keen to help. It's a real community feel down here. So yeah, I guess it's a collaboration of the team, the crew, and the local contractors.
And when you put a team together like this, I always tell the story of when you do a Volvo race or something like that. You'd never have just a good sailor anymore because the sailor has to be also a great sailor, has to be an electrician, a sailmaker, a boat builder, carbon fiber expert, electronics, whatever. Everybody has a level of expertise besides just their sailing capacity. How do you gather that type of group in order to keep a boat like this? Obviously, a gorgeous yacht in one piece when you're doing a race like this.
Well, I think the starting point for me is always to get lifelong sailors involved and to make sure that they have, let's say 20, 30 years of sailing, or at least their whole time in sailing. That provides a great framework for people to understand exactly how everything works, how much you can push things, and how to keep it safe. And then beyond that, I guess, everyone's gone in different directions in their careers. We had a boat builder on the team, Stefan Morrison-Jack, who was amazing. Alex Newman, who's an electrician, amazing. You go through the list. Everyone has different skills. And because a lot of us have been boat owners before, we all understand how to do it. So, it's really a collaboration of experience that creates a great team for us anyway. Yeah.
And the crew, your buddies, everybody knows they're going to have a job or two that they're going to have to chip in and help out.
Well, yeah, if there's a drama, who's the person most likely to sort of attack the problem? And, people are always on the front foot. We're lucky, the boat was very well prepared. We didn't break anything at all, which is quite an astonishing statement given the conditions.
It's a Frere, sorry, what's the boat type?
So I'm saying our boat, MRV.
Yeah, what's the boat type?
Oh, it's a Frere 61. So it's basically like a racing version of a Swan. It was built in 1996. It was never really conceived to be a race yacht. It's fair to say that we've pushed it harder than it ever should have been pushed, and we've put obviously, a full suite of North sails, and recently a PBO Forestay and a bowsprit. You name it, we've done it. So it gets pushed as hard as it can be pushed. Yeah.
How many of these races have you done?
This is my fifth. Focused more on etchels and things like that prior, and obviously a bit of a younger family. So, the kids are a bit grown up. That gives me a bit more scope to do a few more of these races, and we're hoping to do a lot more. Yeah.
And when you're prepping for these things, again, we're trying to talk to the people who maybe are considering doing this. I think I asked Squawk the same question, but when do you start preparing? Let's just make an assumption. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth that you're going to do the next race. When do you start, like, literally, okay, it's time to flick the switch, time to get going here?
I think the starting point is to look at the things you need to do and then obviously look at the lead time for each of those things. I mean, the sooner you start working through it, obviously, the more contingency you have at the back end. So I think to answer your question, you've got to start chipping away with at least 6 months to go, and that time burns down really fast. I can say just before the start, I was fixing something, and I actually wasn't steering through the start. I was fixing something. So look, it's a big problem solving exercise, as we all know, but it's about making sure that it all gets held together and everyone stays safe and nothing breaks.
And I think when you were telling us the story about who you actually sail with, it, not all of us have lifelong yacht club buddies who we've grown up sailing with and started sailing with when we were little tiny kids and right up to today. But again, I think it's a great example for people that you don't have to go gather a bunch of people you don't know. Just look at the bar at your local yacht club and start there.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, the guys in our crew, amazing. Mark Byrne, Grant Allen, Simon Cunnington, Justin McGarvey, Eliza Solly, Dave Suter, Mitch Bayless, Alex Newman, Stefan Morrison, Jack. We've all known each other since we were about, I don't know, 15, 10, It's quite unusual.
I think it's an amazing. I think I'm really glad you were on with us. First of all, thank you. And I think it's a perfect story for people that you don't have to get rock stars. You just take a look at friends. Now, one final question. If you, how would you weigh the difference between experience and just a good sailor? Like you said, you're sailing Etchells a lot, and there's a million good Etchell sailors. Let's say half of them have never been offshore before. One of those Etchell sailors comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm in." Is that something that you automatically say, "Oh, you're a good enough sailor, you can do it," or do you have like a test process that you would potentially go through to bring somebody new into the mix?
No, look, I think a keelboat sailor is a different kind of sailor. An ocean racer is a different kind of sailor. As we've touched on here, you've got to make sure you're able to get through the seasickness issues, and you've got to make sure you've got the mental toughness. There are plenty of people who sail around the dinghies that probably couldn't sail for 24 hours or 4 or 5 days in a row. It does take a certain amount of mental toughness. So I think the first part of it to me is to establish whether, it's obvious that person has the mental toughness. As I said, I've had the pleasure of knowing these guys for such a long time, so it's an easy assessment. One good example, though, I think, is our navigator, Mark Byrne, who sailed a lot of races, but he stepped into the navigator role, and he just decided he wanted to learn. He's a very intelligent guy. He did the Marine Weather University course run by Peter Eisler and the Will Oxley course, and he went from having, let's say, broad knowledge of navigation and weather routing to an incredible knowledge. We didn't have any professional advice leading into the race for our weather routing at all. He did an outstanding job, and we debriefed it the other day. And the parts that he said he got wrong are very small, which is interesting. So he's self-taught through courses online.
Yeah, those are courses for everybody listening. Those are courses that are readily available for anybody, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's great. Perfect. That's exactly how we wanted to finish this up. First of all, congratulations. Gorgeous boat. Thanks from a North Sail standpoint for making us look good, and hope you win this thing. And again,
Yes.
please, first of all, nice job on remembering all your friends' names. That was important for the next time you see them. And but secondly, thanks for making us all look good. The boat's just
Well,
well done.
yeah, can I say the team at North Sails, Squawk and Aaron and Justin couldn't be more helpful. Like, one of the biggest things we did moving into the race was to change our forestay out from an old cruising forestay with an aluminium track on it to a PBO forestay and hanks on the jib. The difference in the performance of the boat was astonishing. We went from a 200 plus forestay 200 kilo plus Forestay set up to something like 20. So the performance of sailing a boat through that was astounding. And, you know, those ideas came from Squawk and then back through Justin and Aaron. And Aaron and I put the Forestay in ourselves.
All right. Well, if I was smart, I'd end right there on that advertisement. So thank you. But we got a couple more slides to go through. Hey, thank you, Damien. I'll get back to you again in a minute. I got a couple questions for you. All right, so we're just going to talk about the basics again for people who have not done these races before, and try to take a little bit of the intimidation out of the process of getting yourself to the starting line. Not to mention just doing the race, but getting yourself to the starting line, because I think a lot of these races are becoming harder and harder just to even sign up for. And I know a lot of the races, I know Bermuda Race is trying to come up with methods to actually help people through the process and things like that. So first of all, sail inventories on boats like this, we're all part of North Sails, so bear with me for a minute. Not all sail inventories, as we talked about with a double-handed boat, are as complex as Squawk's boat here and Blackjack. It does not have to be hard. It can be simple. It can be something that is done scientifically. It can be done through a little bit of feel. But the key is getting an expert, whoever your sailmaker is, getting an expert on the boat to have a look around long before you get to the race course, long before you consider doing this. I think it's an underutilized part of our industry. And Squawk, maybe you can chime in here. People like you and I have done 1,000 sail checks over the years, but I think there's a lot of people that start these races with sails that probably may not be up to it, or a sail inventory that is missing big holes because they didn't just ask us, like literally ask us, hey, can you come sailing with me for a day and look through my inventory?
Yeah, look, I think that's right. I think one of the overarching thoughts for me, and one of the things I'm, the most proud of when we achieve it, is I love selling sails for sailing boats. That's my job. That's fantastic. But when someone comes back and says, "Hey, I use that sail a bit in a different wind angle or a different range or a different spot, and now I can take one less sail on board," I mean, that means that everyone's been thinking about the boat, the wind angles, the performance, and you've come up with a solution where you get one sail that solves two problems. I mean, we work in this space hard on the 100-footers, and Ian and I have talked at length about crossovers and things that can do two for one. But going on the boat, checking the boat, understanding the different nuances of the different boats, and not necessarily selling a sail that does one thing, but a sail that can do more than one thing, is something we all sort of are working on all the time. And you can see it in the Min River inventory. You can see it in Damien's inventory. So that's sort of my overarching thought with sails.
And it's not necessarily just going out to do this to sell a sail either. It's going out to make sure that people who are our friends and or clients or who live near us can get from point A to point B safely. And it could be seeing something in the rigging. It could be something that the people in our business, and again, whatever sailmaker you have, hopefully have enough hours under their belt that they can look up into the rigging and say, hey, this may be something you need to look at.
Yeah, I think Damien's example's the best. I mean, he came to me and said, what's one of the biggest things we can do? And we started talking about, the vertical center of gravity in a sailing boat is roughly around the waterline. Now, I know that's not exactly right, but roughly. So any weight you remove above the waterline in a sailing boat will help pitching, will help heeling, will increase riding moment. So we talked along those veins until we came up with the Forestay solution that pulled circa 170 kilos out of the mast or the weight aloft. And Damien's now telling us that was the biggest performance gain they made. So it's not just about sales. It's about the whole picture and understanding the whole picture.
Good one. So moving on to something that everybody has to do in this safety at sea. Now, I forget, for the Sydney Hobart, do you guys have to get in a pool? Do you guys have to get in the water?
50% of your crew.
50%. And Damien, is this something that was easy to get your whole crew to jump in and understand the necessity behind this?
Oh, look, yes, it is. I think people, once they get their head around the race, they're pretty quick to understand that they're most useful if they're fully informed. So, as much as you can get around understanding all the first aid requirements and all of the safety and sea stuff, the more useful you are as a team member and the more handy it is to back up your mates. So it's an easy sell.
Um, and all the bits and pieces that go on these boats, especially when you're dealing with a 100-footer. Um, Part of the thing that I remember through safety at seas is learning how to hold a flare so I didn't shoot my own foot off. I mean, this is something where do all 25 people on a boat understand and know how to use all the paraphernalia that could save somebody's life?
Yeah, look, I was the deputy chairman of the Australian Maritime Safety Authority that had to come and clean up the mess after 1998. And so very much on boats I come on, it's important that everyone, as many people as possible, have done the safety at sea and they're well versed and they're refreshed and everything. But every time we go out, we go through a little refresher of pulling the bum bags apart, going through the EPIRBs, making sure the batteries are on, making sure everyone knows how to do it, hold the aerials, and that the safety equipment is there and it's usable. So it's just a super important part that people's own they need to understand, and I think it goes more than that. That the crew butting off with their people either side of them in the crew, we all have to look after each other in situations.
That is for sure. The simple, to rifle through some of the simple things. I just want to put a few slides in there. It's things that people have to think about. A lot of times, cruising boats are not the most comfortable boats to try to sleep in offshore, whether it's pipe berths or not. There, you got to. I've seen, Stan Honey damn near killed himself when we were doing a transatlantic on Comanche a number of years ago, just slipping and falling to the other side of the boat. Simplest things like sleeping and foul weather gear and being dry and taking care of yourself. I did a safety at sea seminar a number of years ago, and they asked me what I wanted to talk about. And I told them I want to talk about the kit that I bring on a offshore, and I'd just done a couple of Volvos. So I was pretty familiar with that kit, and I showed up with a bag, twice the size of a bread basket, and I said, "This is my bag for 42 days," and nobody could believe it. And I went through it, and I went through all the stuff, and what people don't realize is less is typically more. It, um, it's easier to keep your stuff contained. It's easier to keep control of what is dry and what isn't dry, and you know what to throw in the bunk with you to try to dry out at the same time. But there's just nothing like the right clothing because man, can this offshore stuff be miserable if you don't. And then just the simplest systems for where do you clip your wet foul weather gear down below. There's nothing worse than a fully cluttered race boat within hours after the start. We've all been on those boats, and it is a miserable mess because there's just stuff strewn everywhere down below in a boat, and just the simple little things in life, like where something goes and that it goes back there every time. If you look around my house is way more cluttered than a race boat is than I would sail on because that's how seriously you have to take it. And then finally, food. I mean, I think like Damien, are you fresh food or are you freeze-dried food on your boat?
It's funny. We've done a bunch of races where we've had freeze dried, but we've never actually taken it out of the cupboard. We're lucky enough to have a great oven set up, and we take a bunch of sort of pasta bakes and things like that. And we've pretty much always got the oven just simmering along and keeps the place nice and warm. And of course, good to keep everyone well nourished and happy. And we have some great catering. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that was going to be your answer, but I hope that was going to be your answer because all of us who have, I don't know, I think I lost 8 kilos or something on one leg thanks to freeze-dried food. I used to I used to stuff peanut butter and jelly into my gear bag and eat that all around the world when the freeze-dried finally wore me out. But you don't have the point of the matter is, for those of you considering doing these races, you don't have to have freeze-dried food, especially if you have a nice oven on board, which most of these boats that aren't completely gutted out race boats actually have really nice facilities to do that. So don't feel for a minute like you have to tough it out and get yourself into the world of freeze dried, because
We
it's better.
we don't have
You-
we don't have coffees without Twinkies being handed out at the same time.
All right. Yeah, fine. So the freeze dried, that got to the freeze dried. Listen, I'm just gonna we have a few more minutes left here, and a few people had sent in. We got a whole bunch of questions sent in, but I'm gonna rifle through these pretty quick and ask you guys a few questions. A little rifle question here. Damien, 30 knots upwind. What was the most reef sail package you sailed with during this race? Like, what was the smallest jib and how many reefs?
We didn't get into the so one reef was the maximum we saw in the race. The boat has a huge sort of very strong riding moment, so it's pretty good like that. And we have what we call an inner jib, which you guys made for us on a PBO forestay that sits inside of the existing forestay. Yeah, that can go up to 35 knots, no worries.
Squawk, what was the most reefed you guys were?
J4 2 reefs.
And Ian?
We ran the J2 and 3 reefs for 3 or 4 hours.
Not so bad. Question, how does the inventory requirement, Squawk, for a race like this, Sydney Hobart race, differ from a race, for example, like the Transpac?
Oh, that's a good question to ask me. We race under a different rule to start with. But generally offshore, it's the same philosophy. You build an inventory of sails that can do everything, and then you focus on the forecast and peel out the sails with the pure thought of weight reduction for the boat. So, if you happen to do a Transpac that was the same forecast as this Hobart, which you would never do because that's a downwind race, you'd have the same sail set. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it's important also to add that it is a different rule, because the question was specific to Transpac. It's a different rule altogether, therefore there's different rule requirements for sail sizes and things like that. Okay, this is one I'll take, and this is a really interesting one. Is there a form of psych evaluation that people use to base their crew selection? And it's an interesting question because I have a friend in town. He used to be a sailing coach, started a company called Predictive Index. His name is Mike Zani. He lives down the street from me. And Predictive Index is a way to kind of Oh, it's a test, and you have to. And some people believe, and some people don't believe. But to create kind of a talent optimization and behavioral, cognitive, job assessments. So my point is this predictive index. So I took it, and I forget if I took it just before or just after the last Volvo race. Doesn't, and we were using it actually for North Sales for a while. And it's a pretty extensive questionnaire, and it grades you and it tells you where your strengths and weaknesses could be. And not that I'm a huge believer in this, but I can see a place where something like this could help you evaluate whether people are going to how well they're going to do under pressure. Are they type A, type B? How are they going to get along with the group? Because you know what? You see people and you see it in yourself, that you see things that you never expected yourself to say or do under the stress of being offshore and in a tough spot for a long period of time. So I guess the answer to the question is there are um, uh, outlets to actually be able to do some sort of cognitive analysis. You got to be a believer in that type of thing, and yeah, maybe worth a crack. If it works for you, then check back in again. Maybe it's something that we recommend to a broader sailing audience. Um, I already asked this question to Damien, so I'm going to move on. The final question is to all you guys. How many beers in the customs house after the race finished, Squawk, before you finally peeled out and went and got some sleep?
Gee, that's a good question. I'd have to refer to my bank account to come back to the answer on that. but there would be a significant blimp in my bank account over those couple of days. I'd say that for sure.
Damien?
Well, when we finished, we were lucky enough to be the clubhouse leaders, so that encouraged our intake of beer for, let's say, long enough for us to forget how many. Yeah.
Ian, I can imagine as the first boat to finish, the customs house was, you tried to drink and drive for a little while.
Yeah, they. It's funny. I went and actually asked them when we're bringing the boat back, how do they have a license that gets going 24 hours? But they have a 24/7 license, which is quite handy for the finish of this race. I'm sure that's not very often that happens, but it's there and it's great. And there's nothing better than running into your mates just in their wet weather gear, just finished, having a bit of a hug, talking about the race. It's it's type 2 fun. A lot of it's pretty hard in the moment, but the moment you get into the customs house and you start sharing the stories, it's bloody great.
Well, by the way, for those who have never done this race before, the customs house is not where you go check in with your passport. It is a good old-fashioned pub where I just remember my sea boots being pretty stuck to the floor after a while in there. All right, you guys, we're gonna wrap it up. We're about 5 minutes, 8 minutes over time. First of all, I'd just really like to thank y'all for being part of this. Hopefully, it's been educational for people who not only are competing in offshore races on an annual basis or on a regular basis, but also for people who really for people who are considering doing this. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It doesn't have to be crazy. It can be the experience of a lifetime. And based on all of us, we keep coming back, and we come back for a reason because I think the experience outweighs maybe the competitive side of it very often. But anyway, on behalf of North Sales, I'd like to thank the marketing department at North Sales, Jen and Bridget and Patrick and all the rest and Laura for helping put this whole thing together. We will do more webinars into the future. There's no question, and might even throw a podcast or two in every once in a while. Anytime you have a question, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of people around the world who are here to help at North Sales. So thanks for being part of our sport. Thanks for being part of this broadcast. And yeah, we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.